Well, I can tell you, you've been role modelling it through my house this week. My two daughters are out from Scotland on
Right.
holiday, and every 10 minutes they're telling me about Martha's reporting. So, and I tell them, yeah, I want to be Martha when I grow up.
I love it.
I'm James Matthews.
I'm Martha Kelner.
It's Friday, the 13th of June. Scary in itself. It's also Friday, the 144th day of Trump's presidency, that is. You can decide which is scariest.
Yeah, we're working towards a big weekend for Trump with the G7 meet, his big military parade, and it's his birthday, his 79th birthday. So we also wanted to answer some of your questions today. Let's dive right in, James. We've got a question from Peter. He says, is Trump increasingly seeking the support of the US military through his actions and rallies? And is this his security against the potential of mass demonstrations?
Hi, Peter. Yeah, thanks for that. Yes, in answer to your first question on whether that gives him security against mass demos. But I suppose the question is at what cost? Trump is the commander in chief. He's in charge of the US military. One of the first things he did after being elected was to fire the military top brass and appoint his own choices. That is significant. You'll remember in his first term, it was senior military who reined him in, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley. Trump reportedly said to him when there were protests around the killing of George Floyd, he said to Milley to crack skulls, just shoot them, he said. And at that point, Milley, he refused. The question today is, where do Trump appointees stand when Trump gives out these kind of orders? There is, of course, the matter of law. In theory, that prevents the military being sent into a domestic setting without congressional approval. California is testing the strength of that law in court, of course, as the president tests it in the street. You mentioned rallies, Peter. We did have that Trump rally at Fort Bragg during the week. We spoke about this before on the podcast, actually. I mean, this was a MAGA rally in all but name. Trump leading active troops and jeering the media, booing political opponents. That's not something that uniformed soldiers are supposed to do on duty. It was a scene, I think, that many would have found inappropriate and many would have found sinister, I think. Martha, one for you from Ian. His question is this. Would Gavin Newsom, governor of California, make a good presidential candidate?
Yeah, that's been a big question asked this week. He's found himself front and centre once again. It's been a bruising first 6 months of the year for California, for Los Angeles in particular. First with the wildfires, which were utterly devastating, and now these protests. But it has been helpful for Gavin Newsom's national profile. It's put his state right front and centre of national conversation. And he is known to harbour presidential ambitions for 2028. In fact, there was that brief period, wasn't there, right after Biden dropped out of the race last summer, that some thought that he might throw his hat in the ring because he was a name that people had heard of. And there aren't that many Democrats who do have, a national profile. People like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she does have a national profile. Bernie Sanders too. We know, though, that Bernie Sanders is not interested in running again. AOC is seen by many as being a little too far left to be a genuine presidential challenger. So that's good news for Newsom. He's also been busy building his profile. He's now got his own podcast, just like us, James, and is a big Democratic Party fundraiser. That's always helpful as a candidate, someone who can raise a lot of money. So that's the good news. The bad news is he's not even popular in the job that he's doing right now, which is usually a decent indicator of whether someone's going to go on to bigger and better things. There was a survey by the LA Times and University of California, Berkeley recently, which showed that Newsom has an approval rating of just 46% for his second term. So not good at all. Whereas, other governors, the likes of Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan, Andy Beshear in Kentucky, Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania, they're also sort of emerging names. They have much more favourable approval ratings. I think they are much more genuine presidential candidates than Gavin Newsom. Our next question, James, is from John. And John says, how close is the US to nuclear war with Iran?
Thanks for that question, John. I suppose the answer to that changed overnight with the Israeli strikes on Iran. We'll have to work out what the immediate ramifications are of that. I would say we're some distance from nuclear war, certainly a two-way nuclear conflict. Tehran, remember, doesn't have a nuclear bomb, and last night was all about trying to keep it that way. It doesn't mean that Tehran won't strike back with what it does have, and that's the question now. Who does it hold responsible? Israel alone, or does it smell US involvement? Bearing in mind that America arms the Israelis and typically supports military action by Israel with US intelligence. The Israelis, they've long seen military action as the way to stop Iran building a nuclear bomb. That doesn't quite sit with Trump's current course of action. That's been to negotiate with Tehran on ending its nuclear program. Israel, it sees this moment as one of opportunity, one of weakness for the Iranians, an appropriate time to strike. Trump, well, latterly, he's been leaning in actually to the idea of an attack, certainly in terms of his rhetoric, which has looked like an effort to strengthen his negotiating hand. The US and Iran, they have been talking. These talks are ongoing about reining in Tehran's nuclear program, but they have become stuck. And Trump, he said before last night that he was frustrated, said Iran had adopted an unacceptable position, said that he was getting less confident about a deal. So, we wait to see Iran's response. That will dictate the immediate course. Does it retaliate? And if so, against whom and with what success? Donald Trump, he doesn't want to get sucked into a wider conflict. That's principally why he's been telling Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister, over a period of time repeatedly to hold off on a strike. Looking at the events of last night, it might well be that Netanyahu has taken the view that he can afford to take a risk with Trump, that for all Trump's ambitions of reconfiguring America's role in the Middle East, a US president will not cut Israel loose in the shifting sands of that region. All of which assumes that Trump, didn't give his assent to these Israeli strikes, that there wasn't an agreement with Israel, explicit or not. I think a few things will turn on the answer to that question and the answer that Tehran reaches on that particular question. We've got a question from Meg, Martha, for you. She says, what I'd like to know is why is it that Donald Trump wasn't concerned and indeed called that mob to arms when the Capitol was stormed, but he's happy to send in the National Guard to Los Angeles?
Hi, Meg. Yeah, it's a very good question. The decision to bring the National Guard to LA last weekend usually is a decision taken by the state's governor, in this case, Gavin Newsom, of course. But Trump has usurped Gavin Newsom's authority by bringing in troops against his wishes. And this has been hugely controversial, not least because politicians were pleading with Donald Trump to send in the National Guard on January the 6th when the Capitol building was being stormed. And that situation, Jan 6th, clearly did stretch law enforcement. 150 of them were injured during the course of that day. Some authorities lost their lives that day. And Trump has said he did request the National Guard that day, but his request was denied. Yet there is zero evidence to back up that claim. You have him bringing not just 4,000 National Guard to LA, but also 700 Marines as well. And I've not seen during the course of the week, I've spent endless hours on the streets of downtown LA. I've not seen any signs of local law enforcement being overcome. So, yeah, it's a good question, Meg. I'm not sure why Donald Trump's brought the National Guard in. James, I've been sent this question on social media at Martha Kelner on Instagram. We've subbed it down for clarity, but we've been asked by a listener. To me, Trump feels like the old fairy tale about the emperor and his new clothes, where everyone is too scared to say, "You're naked, you fool." How can a large majority of the US be prepared to back Trump as he stands with Putin and Russia, makes deals with Middle Eastern countries?
Yeah, it's a question many people are asking, isn't it? I think on the Russia point, It is difficult to understand why many Americans who, until recently, at best, were deeply suspicious of Russia. The question is, why are they not more alarmed about their president aligning himself with Vladimir Putin, contrary to the interests of Ukraine, an old ally? I do think it's fair to say the whole world isn't exactly bracing Trumpism. Countries are looking at their defense arrangements, for example, in some cases being quite clear they see the US now as an untrustworthy ally or actually a potential threat, and they're upping their defense spending in response and so on, as well as reconsidering trade relationships. Rational thought and discussion isn't what it used to be. It gets marginalized these days by screaming hatred, constant division, and conspiracy theory. I think the norms of political debate, as we understand them, don't apply actually to the modern America. We end up in an environment where anybody can say virtually anything and still find a willing audience. A question, Martha, for you from Simon. Hey, Martha, he says, just a quick hello from Australia. I've been following the Trump 100 podcast. You three are doing a great job. Cheers, Simon. He asks, Martha, will Trump survive his full term?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Simon, all the way from Australia. I'd be interested to know if anyone's further away from the UK than Australia and listening to the pod. So get in touch if you are. This question about Donald Trump surviving his full second term, we get that question often. Goes without saying, obviously, we don't have a crystal ball. We can't predict what will happen in the future. But the most likely way, clearly, that Trump doesn't see out his full second term is if he dies or becomes incapacitated. He's turning 79 years old on Saturday. He's the oldest president ever inaugurated. If he makes all 4 years, he'll be the oldest president in history. So his health is the biggest threat to him lasting all 4 years. But physically, he looks pretty sturdy still. There was a little stumble going up the stairs of Air Force One the other day, which I thought if that had have been Biden, we'd have had, MAGA, MAGA people all over social media mocking him. He is likely to face more impeachments and more lawsuits the way he's, governing at the moment. Even Elon Musk was calling for him to be impeached last week. But as it stands, he has a pretty solid hold on the levers of power as well. So it's unlikely he's going to be forced from office, I think. But as I say, we can't predict the future. We've got a question here from Andrew.
I'm glad that they're making you read this out, Martha. Go on.
I'm very embarrassed.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll read it anyway. Andrew says, brave Martha showing true grit. Where are James and Mark when the going gets tough? Where have you been?
Well, thank you, Martha Kelner from downtown Los Angeles, for that question. Hi, Andrew. Actually, we've both been watching and admiring Martha's coverage. Of course, that's where we are very proud of our teammates actually on the ground. Do stick around, though, Andrew. Mark and I, you'll see us in the thick of it soon enough. Maybe not LA, but this story's got road to run. But do trust me, reporters, when the big story breaks, they don't want to be stuck in front of a laptop in their basements. But, in terms of how we operate over here, we've got the bureau in Washington, D.C., where Mark and I are based. In L.A., that's where Martha is. And in journalism, this game, it's about logistics as much as anything else. You deploy your resources according to the story's demands. Do we need extra numbers in LA? We were ready to do that during the week if the scale of the story demanded it. But of course, you have to consider the other strands to this story. Donald Trump, for example, he's been on the East Coast, newsmaker in chief. You don't want to be too far from where he is at a time like this. But listen, Martha's done a terrific job. But be assured, Andrew, Mark and I, we're not hiding under the kitchen table, sucking our thumbs, stroking the comfort blanket. You'll see us crawling on our elbows soon enough.
Everyone wants to be on the biggest story of the week. That's always the case.
Martha, question from Brian for you. What's been the reaction in the United States to Trump scripts being removed from the White House, the government website? From scripts I have seen, says Brian, one can't avoid wondering what sort of person is it who utters such incomprehensible garbage?
Yeah, thank you for this question, Brian. And one of my favourite stories of this second Trump presidency is that the White House stenographers were so exhausted in the first few weeks by the amount of talking that Donald Trump was doing, and they have to, record every word. Just some context, though, for listeners who don't know. The president's public remarks, so this president, many presidents before him, are officially transcribed. So these transcripts are then distributed to the press and put up online. As you can imagine, they are the first draft of history. They're then often translated by foreign embassies and sent around the world. They're referred to by journalists in our reporting. But as with many long-held norms, this White House is doing it differently. On the White House website now, you can browse through some videos of Donald Trump's public remarks as president, but you cannot access the transcripts anymore. Even then, some of the videos are missing. On this, a White House official actually told our colleagues at NBC that government stenographers are still recording and transcribing Trump's remarks. The idea behind the change, that White House official said, is that people will get a fuller and more accurate sense of Trump by watching and listening to him, as opposed to reading a transcript, which they may not be inclined to do anyway. Back to your question as well, Brian, I can't say that there has been a big public reaction here to this change. I think the majority of the public don't even know it's happened. It is a relatively subtle change, but it is an important one, and it kind of embodies Trump's made-for-TV presidential style. Transcripts just aren't his thing.
I'm glad to say, Martha, you can still find Joe Biden's transcripts with... if you'll allow me, one of my questions. When Keir Starmer was visiting the White House, September last year, he was in the Blue Room, big long table, two delegations across from each other. That morning, Vladimir Putin had threatened war if Ukrainian missiles were fired deep into Russia. So the transcript, which I happened to look at before we started.
So this is your question?
Yeah. My question to the kind of assembled throng. So, question, Mr. President, what do you say to Vladimir Putin's threat of war? President Biden, I say to you, be quiet until I speak, okay? That's what I say. Good idea? Question mark. Question, me again. Well, what do you say to Vladimir Putin's, question, sir, question, threat of war, sir? It's a serious threat. President Biden, well, you've got to be quiet, and I'm going to make a statement here, okay? So that was the exchange. But you know what? He made a statement, and then I asked him again and got my answer at the third time of asking. President Biden, I don't think much about Vladimir Putin. Yeah, so there you go. That's my moment on the White House transcript. Better print it off before Biden takes it off the internet as well, maybe.
I love it. James Matthews, the first draft of history.
Yeah, be quiet, Matthews.
I know. I didn't realise Biden had said that to you. I'm going to start invoking him on the podcast.
Yeah. Are you offended on my behalf?
That's pretty much all we've got time to get through this week, though. Thank you ever so much for sending in your questions. We appreciate them. Please keep them coming. If you have a question you'd like myself, James, or Mark to answer, send it to us on trump100@sky.uk, or you can follow us all on social media and ask us there. What's your social media handle, James?
It is at James Matthews Sky. So yeah, do keep them coming. We do like to read your questions and have a crack at least at answering them. So yeah, keep them coming. But for now, the team will be back on Monday. Look forward to speaking to you and joining you then.